Movies have always been an experience beyond the screen. They leave something behind each time the credits roll. Thoughts and feelings to take away as we exit their space and fall back to reality. It's the culmination of a mini odyssey in that way. The ritual of leaving our homes, entering a curated dimension, and being taken to a place that is larger than life. But it's not just film that orchestrates that sense of transition. There's a wider environment at play, a key component of which accompanies us from the moment we step into the cinema to the come down that invariably comes next: the movie poster. Movie posters, like cinema itself, are inherently larger than life, a window to play with perception, scale, and the abstract, and which connote not only the scale of the medium, but also the feel of a given piece of cinema. Done well, and they become more than just an obligation of marketing, emerging instead as a totemic part of a film's contextual narrative. Martin Scorsese likened this relationship to the idea of chasing a phantom, as audiences seek to recapture and carry that cinematic vibe with them. But as Letterboxd UK editor Ella Kemp surmises in her piece, One Sheet Wonders: The Art, Psychology, and People Behind Film Posters, it's also an accurate description for the process of crafting one too. The works of Drew Struzan, John Alvin, Bill Gold, and Saul Bass, to name just a few of the seminal poster artists who've left an imprint on the medium over the last 100 years, are inextricably linked to their cinematic subjects. In more recent history, we can also look to the likes of photographers like Peter Tangen, whose work across the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy remains an iconic touchstone of 2000s popular culture. If there is a phantom to chase, then by Scooby-Doo, these guys got it. Flash forward 20 years later though, and the movie poster landscape appears decidedly less interesting. There is the occasional banger, don't get me wrong, such as the recent big sheets of the Marion Cotillard starring The Ice Tower, but for the most part, posters for big movie blockbusters tend to feature the same stale, uninspiring tropes. Goopy digital imagery, intrusive airbrushing, and head collages aplenty. Lots and lots of head collages, I really can't stress that one enough. These floating head posters, as they tend to be referred to as, are a particular favorite of tentpole franchises like the MCU and Star Wars, with both coming in for criticism in recent years for reverting to the same visual tropes. A criticism that stings especially in the case of the latter, given its position in the lineage of artists like Roger Castell and the aforementioned and now dearly departed Drew Struzan. This dearth of vibrancy in the movie poster space, at least as far as blockbusters are concerned, I need to stress that, is down to a myriad of factors, ranging from contractual obligations to the nature of marketing in the age of smartphones, social media, and a world where cinema attendances are more precarious than they once were. The result of these cumulative stresses, sadly, and it would appear, has led to less expressive works of poster art. Pieces designed primarily to outcompete the algorithm and wrangle our eyes for even a fleeting moment while scrolling through social media. Kernels of beauty remain within that prism, but the space is more constricted and uncomfortable, with the window to create a poster that is expressionistic, evocative, and truly individual seemingly narrower than ever before. Hey everyone, Ewan here for Whatculture, and if you couldn't tell, I've had movie posters on the brain a lot lately. Mainly after seeing the marketing for The Ice Tower and being hit with the sense of, damn, this is like the first poster in a while that's actually captured my attention. And then I got thinking, what about poster art really captures my attention, and why is it that today, for the most part, posters just seem to blur together into some Cronenbergian head creature thing? It's all sinewy and gross to look at. Whereas I look at the posters for Spider-Man 2 and I'm like, hell yeah, that's really doing something for my brain right there. Now, nostalgia is obviously a powerful drug, and there is a danger when looking back at the history of poster art that we oversimplify the past and minimize the merit of more modern works. We are all a product of various inputs and stimuli, and from that we form synaptic connections with the art we encounter. By that I mean, yes, Tangent's work on 2004's Spider-Man 2 is beautiful and iconic, but it holds a unique place within my silly zillennial brain as the film that was also a touchstone of my early aughts childhood. The same will doubtlessly be the case for the generation of film fans who have come of age in the 2010s and 2020s, many of whom will also be looking to catch the same elusive phantom Scorsese conceptualized, but with works designed in the digital-first age. Regardless of method, movie posters advertise as much as they capture a moment in time. They recollect a feeling, a vibe, but as we all know, some vibes are cooler than others, and by that same token, it's important to acknowledge that changes have taken place, and not always for the better. Trends have long guided the art form, but repetition, say 60 or so years ago, largely adhered to more expressive and abstract currents, with movements like pop art and minimalism cultivating a more vibrant spectrum of one-sheets and quads. A photograph or painting of a star could sell a movie, but said star power could be harnessed in a variety of ways, whether to invoke their cool factor and sex appeal, as with the one sheep, the Steve McQueen starring 1968 thriller Bullet, or to complement the overall tone and spirit of a picture, exemplified in the simple but fluorescently striking poster for Billy Wilder's The Apartment, which features a playful Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine off-center at a distance, set against a scarlet background. Forming an even greater contrast with the blockbuster posters of today are those that adhered most closely to minimalist influences. Saul Bass was a pioneer in this regard, with his posters for Vertigo, Anatomy of a Murder, and The Shining capturing the disorientation, peril, and terror of those respective films without the need for stills at all. Similar legendary examples of posters made in this tradition include Roger Castell's Jaws one-sheet and Philip Gibbs's designs for Rosemary's Baby and Alien. Posters laden with stark, fierce, and evocative imagery, each conjuring feelings of dread in all of its terrifying and often subtle undercurrents. Now, contextually, this trend of graphic experimentation was influenced by the creative freedom afforded by the American New Wave of the 60s and 70s, and the shifting approaches to star power and studio politics that went along with it. Even then, however, when Hollywood returned with a vengeance in the 1980s, poster design largely remained expressive and gutsy. This was the same decade Struzan burst onto the scene with iconic posters for John Carpenter's The Thing and Bob Zemeckis' Back to the Future. Warner Brothers, meanwhile, developed a commercial phenomenon with 1989's Batman, and the defining advertising image was a logo set against a black backdrop. In this case, it was the very absence of specificity that generated anticipation and intrigue, a creative flex which spoke to the inimitable qualities of the medium. Like, yeah, Michael Keaton's name and Jack Nicholson's name were on there too, but if anything, this thing was sold by a logo and a logo alone, despite obviously Batman having a lot of cultural cachet over the previous decades from like the comics and obviously the 60s TV show. Now, this isn't to say, obviously, that every poster historically has been a hit and that we've only recently experienced a sudden drop-off in variety and expression, but rather that the environment for blockbuster filmmaking, even in the commercial context of the 80s, was more adventurous than it is today. Even at their most conservative or garish, posters from the big studios could still feel painterly or somewhat authored. As much as it personally pains me to pay a compliment to Ron Howard's The Grinch or Santa Claus 3, The Escape Clause, color blocking and image composition were clearly scrutinized during their design, terrifying as Martin Short's Jack Frost might be to look at. Ugh. It's like almost as terrifying as Michael Keaton's Jack Frost. Almost. Anyway, yes, getting back on topic, where I'm going with here is that basically there is no reason that a poster for a Marvel movie as big as, say, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings should be so washed out and anonymous by comparison. Like, look at it, it's just a bunch of grey sadness and some guys. That's it. It's like they ordered, hey, poster guy, Please give me some grey sadness and some guys on this poster. No problem, Disney. Here you go. Just doesn't look good. For the last 6 or so years, the Mouse House's superhero studio has been, by far, the biggest offender for uninspired film posters. Avengers Infinity War and Endgame were criticized for their head posterisms, but they at least had strong, recognizable color palettes. Compare them to the posters for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania or Captain America Brave New World, and the lack of invention is clear to see. This contrast is exacerbated when you compare Marvel's posters with the competition, namely the crimson stylings of Matt Reeves' The Batman or the kaleidoscopic tones of James Gunn's Superman, and then blown up to dispiriting levels when you look into the company's own past. The difference in artistry and intrigue between Tangent's Spider-Man posters and those designed for Spider-Man Homecoming is night and day. The former boasting a gorgeous combination of dusk-light imagery and reflective peril, and the latter having a smattering of actors placed sort of all over a generic New York skyline. Far From Home and No Way Home are just as bad too. Like, I don't look at these Spider-Man movies and think, hey, here's something authored and exciting. I think they're selling a film called Spider-Man Bunch of Guys. Spider-Man Guys Coming. Maybe not that. We'll workshop it. More than just laying bare Marvel's modern-day shortcomings, the posters for the Tom Holland Spider-Man films also illustrate an overall flattening of blockbuster aesthetics in the digital age. For Marvel specifically, where a house style is carried across from script to screen, it feels emblematic of a lack of creative endeavor. But in regards to the industry's wider evolution over the last 2 decades, it also encapsulates everything from studio anxieties to contractual quirks and the ever-shifting landscape of digital advertising. There are a lot of pressures being exerted all at once here, and for the biggest movie franchise on the planet, the consequences have been felt most acutely. Back to the actual movie poster landscape more generally now, and for painted posters specifically, their decline may also be attributed to the ephemeral nature of theatrical runs and the relatively nascent lifespan of cinema as an art form. In a piece on his personal blog titled The Lost Art of Painting Posters, author Christopher Fowler recounts his own experiences working as a writer for a UK-based advertising agency early in his career, in which he saw dozens of painted posters for films made under the Rank Organisation banner getting shunted straight to landfill, a fate that reflected the lack of recognition British poster artists receive for their work, and for the art form more generally. Rank collaborated with legendary British auteurs like Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, Carol Reed, and Alfred Hitchcock, but here were the physical remnants of their legacies being broken up and destroyed as if they were just scrap. Fowler's anecdote also seems to offer a partial explanation as to why illustrated poster art declined in the latter half of the 20th century. By the time we started our own film marketing company, Fowler explains, photography was replacing artwork, actors were seeking image approval, and artists' interpretations were no longer wanted as Hollywood tightened its control on copyright. Compared to the art of painting, photography is expeditious to the deadlines and demands of a commercial industry. And to that end, it's no surprise that painted poster art has fallen to the wayside in the way it has. Hollywood continues to undermine and undervalue artists from the conceptual stage of development through to graphic designers, animators, and pretty much every human element in between. A long-term trend now exacerbated by the encroaching influence of big tech and the implementation of generative AI in studio workflows. And as an aside to that comment just there, it's a really rough time to be an artist right now, so please make sure you're supporting and cherishing those that are your favorites, whether they're a big artist who's doing their own work or someone that's in your local community. Art's important, we need to value it and protect it because clearly these big businesses who are all over AI right now don't really give a hoot, and that's really depressing. Anyway, yes, this attitude also filters down to studio archives, with box art on home video releases outside of the boutique labels like Criterion and Arrow Video defaulting to bland digital compositions that flatten texture and erase the vibrancy of past aesthetics. Like, look at the contrast between the posters for Rio Bravo and the recent-ish 4K release. I understand there's a science here behind wanting to illustrate how crisp and premium the 4K format is, but the new art lacks the vibrancy and motion of those earlier posters, and I know what I'd rather have on my shelf. Again, this isn't to diminish the beauty of photographed or digitally composed posters, or to argue that painted posters are a one-size-fits-all solution. Their decline does, however, feel emblematic of industry neglect towards the disparate human components that each form a pillar of the cinematic experience, as well as a potential lack of faith in audiences to extrapolate a vibe or meaning from a piece of art. It's the same sort of attitude that leads to stuff like second screen viewing at Netflix, or shows being encouraged to be shot with everything in center frame so that it fits vertical video on social media. It's not good, it's not fun, and yeah, these studios don't really think that we're paying attention to the stuff that they're showing and producing. So heavy is the encroachment of smartphones into both our home and also, annoyingly, despite constant reminders, the cinema as well. Now, of course, abstract or minimalist art will not meet the needs of every film out there, whether due to those previously mentioned external pressures or simply because they don't evoke the right spirit or mood for a given project. Sometimes, given the nature of how we as a prospective audience interact with marketing in the digital age, the most clear and concise method can also sometimes be the most appropriate. It's a high-wire balancing act that Kemp draws attention to in her piece for Letterboxd, concluding from a conversation with Ahai Films' Courtney Mayhew that the art of movie poster creation doesn't so much lie solely in artistic appeal, as much as it does, and I love this, the act of, quote, finding gateways for people to connect with the art of film. There hasn't and never will be a one-size-fits-all approach to the craft, and given the breakneck pace of digital advertising, it makes sense that certain design tropes have become entrenched, the studios more anxious than ever about cinema attendances and box office turnarounds. It's also true that a movie's marketing doesn't just begin and end with one poster. Quads, character one-sheets, and the occasional complimentary abstract teaser may all be commissioned depending on the size and scale of a given project. For Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight, this meant both a painted teaser poster and a more high-profile photography-based campaign that emphasized the star power of its ensemble cast. The former arguably succeeded best in conveying the paranoid atmosphere of Tarantino's Western, but the latter would have played a valuable role in evoking its blizzardy imagery and star-studded credentials, whilst also avoiding the pitfalls of a Disney-style floating head collage. Given the space to cook, then, modern movies can still be given an iconic poster. And if we look away from the big tentpole studios to small and mid-budget works, the success rate for banger artistry increases. Robert Eggers' Nosferatu remake had not one, but two brilliant main posters that obscured its lead's features, all while the film itself went on to claim a mighty $181 million haul at the box office. Looking elsewhere, 70s throwbacks Licorice Pizza and The Holdovers each received one-sheets that mirrored the illustrative and abstract trends of that decade's aesthetics, while cult favorites like David Lowery's The Green Knight and Zach Cregger's Barbarian utilized striking minimalism and a primary color palette to equally great effect. So yeah, while there's still clearly plenty of beauty in the movie poster medium then, even in those studio tentpoles that feature head collages most prominently, there's also an issue in that the scope for the abstract and expressive has narrowed as studio trust in audiences has diminished. To use the same example as before, in 1989, Warner Bros. Believed in the Batman brand strongly enough to sell an entire film on a logo and the names of its two leads. In 2022, the studio started marketing its latest Batman film, Matt Reeves' The Batman, with a series of gorgeous, blood-red minimalist one-sheets, before then capitulating to trend and taking the floating collage route before it actually premiered. Now, it's not unusual for a blockbuster to take a multi-pronged approach with its poster marketing, combining big one-sheets with individual character posters maybe, but in this particular case, the Batman demonstrates quite neatly the insecurity of our current filmmaking context. As the years have progressed, The Dark Knight has appreciated into an even greater asset than ever before, and at a time when studios are more protective than ever of their intellectual property. While Warner Bros. Could market a new Batman film with a mixture of abstract imagery that evokes the spirit of the character in an artistically compelling and alluring way, as was arguably achieved by the aforementioned Crimson posters, there's almost an anxiety that audiences will miss the point, hence the change in approach to the film's marketing. Posters should, by their very nature, tease and seduce by divulging information in one hand and withholding it in the other, but more often than not, they're crammed with as much as possible to cover the widest possible base. As is reflected in the Batman's theatrical poster, which did away with the red imagery of the film's initial phase of marketing. Robert Pattinson is a star with a huge following, so the poster needs to show him as Bruce Wayne. Never mind the fact that Batman is already center frame. Penguin and Catwoman are both huge Batman characters, so they also need to be on the poster at the same time. The film features an unconventional interpretation of the Riddler, but rather than guard that revelation with an abstract tease, his costume needs to be shown brightly to clue audiences in on the change. But really, the worst thing about the poster, and the thing that exacerbates its lack of ambition most of all to me, is its dull composition, which features every character standing head-on, static, and, barring Penguin who's having a fun time, standing relatively stone-faced. Compare that now to the collage posters for Batman Returns, Batman Forever, or yes, even Batman and Robin, and the drop-off in energy becomes even more jarring. At the same time, while the contrast between the 90s Batman posters and those from his most recent film demonstrates that head posters can work, the overall space to experiment within those confines has been constricted. A convergence of contractual demands for actors to get their own slice of poster real estate, key art having to juggle an even greater breadth of merchandising, and an evolving digital advertising landscape leaves little wiggle room for experimentation with so many needs to meet. That isn't the case with every film released today, like clearly not, but the lack of invention with certain blockbuster budgeted projects does perhaps reflect studio frailties and the sense of disposability that accompanies our digital-first existence. It's an extension of the physical media conundrum which I discussed in our video on the perceived death of the DVD last year, which you should go watch if you haven't already. The more audiences engage with media digitally, the less the totemic and ritualistic qualities of cinema, the act of walking through a lobby or of purchasing a DVD, Blu-ray or 4K and taking it home, come into play. It's not quite touching grass so much as it is touching the popcorn, in effect. Go touch more popcorn. It's good for you. I mean, what am I getting at here? Oh yeah, well, if the first and main way an audience engages with a poster has shifted from the cinema to a reel on Instagram or an advert on TikTok, the more that iconography develops into something transient and disposable. Posters today live fast and die young, whereas the quads and one-sheets of yore had decades to strengthen their roots in the collective pop cultural psyche, providing a gateway during a film's theatrical run, and then becoming fixtures as home media expanded in the 1980s and 1990s. For as much as it is the case that Hollywood has historically underestimated the impact and longevity of the painted poster, these pieces were able to develop venerated status through repeat exposure, thereby becoming the phantom we've kept trying so desperately to chase. Like, I'm sure there are loads of you my age who also used to go around the horror aisle in Blockbuster when you were younger and have those posters that are seared particularly into your brain. For me, I still regularly think about Michael Ironside being fried on the cover of Scanners, and I sincerely doubt that an airbrush still would have had quite the same effect. The phantom may also apply to those posters that aren't as painterly or as interestingly composed as those developed by the poster artists of yore. But as the science of movie marketing has evolved, refined to the most acute detail with marketing research, engagement data, and so on, success is more easily quantified. Patterns form and the scope for experimentation diminishes, especially for those projects that have the most to lose, like a Batman, an Avengers, or a Star Wars. But again, for the avoidance of all doubt as we bring this spiral to a close, this applies to just a portion of the movie industry at large. Great poster art is there for those who look for it, whether from smaller studios, boutique physical media labels, or even the occasional tentpole. In a way, it's an issue of exposure and prominence. There's a perception of modern poster art as lacking because the scope of blockbuster fiction has also narrowed in a post-MCU, post-pandemic world, where intellectual property is king, and reboots, remakes, and requels rule the roost. It would be dramatic to argue that this lack of endeavor has killed the phantom Scorsese spoke so fondly of. But perhaps, as far as the big studios are concerned, the desire to chase it has lessened just a bit.